You're watching Truth versus Hype. Could new rules expanding maternity benefits for women meant to increase the entry of women into the workforce trigger a backlash and cause job losses? Will it help or aggravate a trend of declining women in India's workforce? Here's the context. In March 2017, new rules came into effect expanding maternity leave from 12 weeks, that's 3 months, to 26 weeks, just over 6 months. Further, unlike earlier, companies with more than 50 employees have to provide creche facilities. The new guidelines also provide maternity leave for adopted children. Now, these steps pushed India amongst the top 5 countries in the world when it comes to progressive maternity benefits and were widely welcomed. Generous maternity leave is linked to better infant and maternal health, as well as encouraging women to join the workforce. But just over a year since the new rules comes some worrying news. A recent survey by the HR company TeamLease has found that the new laws may see in the short term 1 crore women being pushed out of the job market. The survey is actually broken into 2 parts. In the first part, 300 employers in 10 sectors ranging from real estate, banking, aviation and so on were surveyed, and it was found that in these sectors alone, about 11 to 18 lakh job losses for women were forecast. And across all sectors, the amount TeamLease estimated will be about 10 times higher, 1 crore losses. Mainly because of small and medium industries saying that they'll have to cut back on hiring women because of the additional financial burden of these new benefits. Now, this comes in the wake of worries over job creation, as well as multiple studies that find the role of women in the workforce is steadily shrinking. A much-cited World Bank study finds that India ranks low, 121 out of 131 countries on female labour force participation. That has actually fallen from 37% in 2004 to 27% in 2014. The reasons, according to the bank, range from women opting out of jobs for higher education, women unable to get jobs because of a lack of education, marriage. And now, this news of potentially more job losses. Well, joining us tonight to accept or challenge all of this is a terrific panel. We have with us Shobhana Kamineni, who's of the Apollo Group, past president of CII. Joining us here in the studio, Beena Agarwal, who's a professor of development economics at the University of Manchester, one of our finest minds on the political economy of gender. Shamika Ravi, great to have her as always, researcher at Brookings India and member of the PM's Economic Advisory Council. And Rituparna Chakraborty, VP of TeamLease, the group that did this survey. So, Rituparna, let me just start with you and get you to defend, in a sense, the survey, because there are already people who've come out and critiqued it and said that this is too pessimistic, and whether your data actually, your methodology and data are actually sound. So, explain to us a little bit about how you've arrived at these numbers. So, you polled, you said, across 10 sectors of the economy, 300 employers.
So, I think, to be very honest, this is a survey estimate which I would love to be proven wrong about, because this is absolutely undesirable. However, what really led to it, essentially out of the 10 sectors, while 3 sectors emphatically have been talking about the positive impact of this particular amendment, especially IT, ITS, the e-commerce segment.
Yes.
They have seen that it has improved it can potentially improve the diversity, inclusion situation within the workplace. It can actually also reduce post-maternity attrition. However, sectors like real estate, education, aviation, manufacturing, BFSI, we felt that there was an apprehension, or there was a certain concern creeping in, and large part of the concern was around costs.
Okay.
Essentially, I think it's not so much about the 6 months benefits, it's about how does one really fend. The cost has doubled pretty much. It used to be earlier 3 months, now it's 6.5 months.
Right.
Also the estimate shows that for white collar profile, the cost The post-maternity benefit retention cost goes up to about 85%.
Okay.
And for white collar profile, for blue collar profile, it is up to 130%.
Okay. All right.
And
understood.
these seem sizable amount for organizations in SME and startups.
Okay. Shobhana Kamineni, respond to this. I mean, for someone like your group, I'm assuming the Apollo Group employs a very large number of women. Is this new act, the amendments to the act, is this actually going to dissuade you from hiring more women, or is this going to be the reverse?
I'm not sure whether it'll be the reverse, but dissuading this sector, if you look at it, healthcare is something that definitely is attractive and requires a lot of women, especially in the nursing profession. And I think that whatever benefits, so just to state, being a woman, and just like Rituparna opened up, that this is something that needed to be done because 3 months was never enough.
Yes.
We have to solve for the 6 months. So I think that the way that the problem was solved could have been slightly better, you know, because one is that we can use this very positively. And I think it's an important move, it's an important message.
Okay.
One, these are events that happen maybe maximum twice in a woman's lifetime.
Right.
So I think that that this is something that can be planned for. If a woman is going to work in a company for 25 years, 30 years, giving them this kind of a leeway, I think, is actually beneficial. It creates more bonding, more loyalty, and I think it's instead of having to train more people in, you know, fresh and have that as a retention policy, it's actually kind of good.
So you welcome it.
Coming to how do we solve for it?
Yes, but what do you think could have been done better? You're saying that it could have been improved. What do you mean by that?
A couple of things. A couple of things. One is that I feel that the bill is too skewed against women again. Why not make sure that companies that have that the male employees that have babies, that they pitch in half the cost, so then it gets more widespread, so it's not targeted just to women, and it's spread out. The second is that companies, especially for the SMEs, the government should have chipped in and said, okay, let's help you, we'll help you set up creches, we'll help you, we'll give you subsidies for this. And you know, especially in the light of the fixed term employment across sectors, people, it's going to be way more flexible. So in the short term, they will see more drop off. And I think this is a bill that has to be, that actually has to be strengthened and made more palatable, because it's something that is good for women.
I think that was an important point about the need for government support. But just to overall very quickly summarize what you're saying, Shobhana, you're saying that as far as you are concerned, Apollo Group is concerned, this is not going to actually discourage you from hiring women. You continue to hire women at the same
we have to keep taking women. We'll just find ways. Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Shamika Ravi, now
it'll have to be, and I think there's sectors like IT, and there's sectors that require women.
Right.
So we have to look at it in that perspective.
Okay, what do you make of the TeamLease survey? Do you think that it's credible? Do you think that there is going to be a pushback, which perhaps has already happened? And to her point about the fact that the government could perhaps chip in and help, quote unquote, subsidize some of these additional benefits.
So, Vasu, it's important to understand that it's a progressive policy to begin with.
Yeah,
in
it's
fact,
a great policy.
But 3 months was fairly progressive too.
Right.
In fact, it sort of matched the kind of policies other countries have. Like China has 98 days, which is about 14 weeks. Right. Switzerland has exactly the same, which is 98 days. Now, which tells you that, you know, someone has to bear the cost. If the society wants children, and if society wants equal opportunity for women, someone has to pay for it. Sure. Now, this is where now, if industry is telling you that it's maybe the cost is a bit too much now with 6 months, they would perhaps require government support. And frankly, I'm sympathetic to that, because I do think 6 months might be a bit much for the SMEs in the startup space.
Okay. So you think that there's a valid claim to get government support for this?
Well,
and the government could consider
industry support, but there has to be, maybe CSR could fund it. What I'm saying is, where we find the money for it is a sort of a side issue. Right now, we have to accept the fact that this substantially raises the cost of firms that employ women. Now, going back to the heterogeneity or the variations that they find across industries, and this is also something Shobna adhered to, you know, in industries where you can substitute women in terms of the services, there it's going to be, you know, most of them will move away from women, because essentially you're saying pay them half a year's salary, you know, so someone does bear the cost. But healthcare, nursing is fundamentally a women's, and therefore I would suspect
that's a very practical but somewhat unfortunate assessment that, you know, where women are replaceable, they will be replaced.
Unfortunately.
One wishes that won't happen. But Beena Agarwal, I mean, we're still trying to gauge whether the impact is largely going to be felt in the formal sectors of the economy, which broadly seems to have been captured by the TeamLease survey. But as someone who's also worked and mapped the informal sector, which is where a bulk of the women appear to work, what would you make of this debate?
Well, the bill isn't addressed to the informal sector at all. It's essentially focused on the formal sector. And we know that only a very small proportion of women are in the formal sector, certainly less than 10%. Now, if you were to believe the predictions of this survey, that employers would be deterred in hiring women, it doesn't make clear whether it's going to, these figures don't make clear whether you're going to not allow existing workers to continue. It seems to me it would be much more in terms of prediction on new hiring, on future hiring, which means that younger women who will join the workforce, it will reduce their opportunities. And we've been pushing for having more women in the formal sector. But then so in that sense, it would be unfortunate. However, I completely agree with the fact that you have to have maternity benefits. 26 weeks is seems to be a fair number if you're going to be progressive, but it's.
But I wanted to ask you about something else that I brought up in my introduction. That how does this play into this overall anxiety that we have about the fact that there is already a shrinking of women's participation in India's workforce? Firstly, how serious or how real is that threat or that number? Because the World Bank report, which, you know, everyone cites and we cited it as well, shows that it's just, you know, it's just been tapering off over years.
Yeah, we have to see why there has been a decline, and there are broadly three kinds of factors. One is certainly the lack of adequate jobs for women in the way that they might want it. The second is undercounting of women, the measurement issues. And the third is the issue of supply, that the girls are being more educated, and that's good, but also women are staying back if their families are earning more. Now, a bill like this would, I would think, bring more women into the workforce. Certainly, research from other countries indicates that when you introduce maternity benefits, which are generous, then more women enter the labor force.
And yet, on the other hand, you have this sort of...
But on the demand side, what you're saying is that employers may be deterred from hiring. Now, how this plays out overall remains to be seen.
Right. Shamika, to that point about the drop in women's labor force participation, I mean, 10% over a decade, that seems huge.
And it's also, it's not seen anywhere else. With growth, even in places where you have very skewed sex ratios for several decades, like South Korea, it did catch up. And in our case, I think, frankly, you know, laws are very, you know, simple ways of solving complex problems, simplistic ways, I'd argue. You know, you'd have to implement the existing 3-month thing first of all. How many companies are adhering? But remember, as Beena said, it's a very small formal sector that really, you know, the compliance or something like this. What is public transport like? What is the safety situation for women to access these kind of markets? What's the daycare facility? It's not like in 6 months the child will take care of itself. So what kind of institutional setups exist in increasingly, you know, nuclearizing families, urbanizing families? So we have to look at multiple complex factors. And I think, you know, this one stroke doubling of maternity, I think Shobna's point is a very good one when she said that what about splitting it between paternity and maternity leave? Why are you making it more costly for the women? If the men were also to get leave, in fact mandatorily I would argue, then the cost is, you know, the companies don't then necessarily substitute away from pregnant women or childbearing women.
That's, no, that was a good point. But Shobna, I want to ask you that, you know, given that from what we are gathering, that there already seems to be some resistance to this from employers. Now, as a business leader, would you be able to reach out to other business leaders, perhaps through, you know, the medium of CII or even otherwise, to try to work through this problem and say, look, this is a good idea. It could come at a cost, but there are other costs, other benefits, which outweigh perhaps those costs.
So, Srinivasan, we are actually we have started, doing something about it, and we're looking to create more forums for women leadership, get more women out there, but also down the line, the CII-IBN network actually has a lot of women separate members now, and we're growing that chapter actually by leaps and bounds. There are more women coming in. We're trying to encourage the importance of diversity. I think once people, one is that we need to equalize the pain, make sure that people understand the importance of diversity in their companies, because it really adds to the value and the performance, and as you go higher up in the ladder also. And then the government, while we applaud their move, again I come back to the thing that they shouldn't just pass a bill, but they should also be willing to put some money behind making it work, because long term I think that it's undoubtedly great for the country, because we will have healthier children. That's super important. If you look at the quality of nutrition in the country, if you look at the care, those first 6 months are critical in child care. So if you look at it on so many parameters, there is social justice in this.
Right.
But we have to make it, we have to take it to the people that it matters.
Right. Rituparna, on that point about formal, informal, now just to understand that you were mapping largely potential losses in the formal sector, but you also put out a figure, a projected figure of 1 crore job losses. Now that includes, I'm assuming, all sectors, is it? Because that seems like a very large number. So
yes, all sectors. That includes. Yeah, but I think that's honestly an extrapolated figure. However, our findings, it encompasses yes, it encompasses everything across all sectors. So essentially the approach is sectoral. Incidentally, each sector has a certain amount of people deployed through informal channels as well. So I think our focus has been to stick to the sectors in the approach. The 1 crore data essentially is an extrapolation based on what we found across the 10 sectors. But the 10 sectors, of course, that's a factual data that we have unearthed based on the survey.
Because there was
if I may add to what Shobna...
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Rituparna.
I think to add to what Shobna was saying, that I think this issue, while of course there is a role for government to play, but I think government has in any case, through this decision or this boldness of coming out with this, have done their bit. And yes, there are areas that government can support, but I do believe industry has a huge role to play in that. And especially those companies and organizations who clearly sees the benefits, they have to become role models, trailblazers for the rest. They have to come out and share their case studies, their success stories, and hence CII, NASSCOM, PhD Chamber of Commerce, FICCI, all of them have a huge role to play, because it's about communication as well. Some of the fear and apprehension, to my mind, is a little unsaid.
Right. No, those are great suggestions actually. Beena, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you can't make projections if the law doesn't apply to the informal sector, which is 90%.
Let me just point out something to you here. No, just one quick clarification. We actually found online that there were some clarifications issued by the Ministry of Labour, I think, in response to some queries by industry. And they clarified, and this was somewhere around last year, July of last year, that the Act is applicable to all mines, plantations, shops and establishments, factories in the organized as well as the unorganized sector. So they seem to suggest it applies to the unorganized sector as well, though I'm not sure how that actually works.
No, I don't see...
Some unorganized establishment, informal is hardly going to follow.
No, I don't think it's going to work in the informal sector. Suppose you take domestic workers in Delhi.
Yes.
Now, if they're working for 6 households and for short periods of time, how are you going to say, well, she's going to get 26 weeks from which? But I want to come back to a few points. I think it's interesting that in the survey, they found that IT and e-commerce were particularly supportive. But those are exactly the organizations and sectors where you can have flexi work time, and women and men can work at home, or they can work in the office. You have, and increasingly you find in countries like Australia, even in the United States and elsewhere, that you're allowing employees to have flexi work time. They decide on which part of the day they want to work, and they're finding that it is much more efficient than if they didn't have that. But on cost, I think the government's responsibility can't rest at simply passing an act. It has to put financial resources in it. And one of the areas which I think it's very important is not just to, well, Australia, for instance, you have the government provides the funds for maternity, for parental leave, and then in addition to whatever private sector provides. But I think what cuts across formal and informal is really the provision of creches. So, for instance, what you mentioned was that what happens if you take 8 weeks before you have the baby, and then you have 18 weeks after. What are you going to do with the baby after that? If you don't have your mother-in-law, and if you don't have... So creches, and in Japan, in fact, the government invested hugely in creches, which led to an increase in female labor force participation rates. It is important to emphasize that if you want a level playing field, you do need to have maternity leave and paternity leave. And, you know, countries like Iceland have what they called daddy bonus, which means that the father has to take leave, and it can't be substituted by the mother.
Some very valuable suggestions, including to the government, which I'm sure could be conveyed to the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council.
I made it a note.
I made a note. And also to CII. But that's all the time we have. Thank you all so much for joining us on Truth versus Hype for what's been a fascinating discussion. That's all the time we have. Thanks for watching. Good night.